The sky was a heavy quilt of gray, stitched with veins of rain that drummed against the metal roof of the auction barn. The place smelled of damp hay, old leather, and resignation. Horses shifted uneasily in their pens, their coats shining dully beneath the dim yellow lights. Some stamped their hooves in agitation, some nickered low, while others stood with heads hanging low, resigned to whatever fate awaited them. Clara stood near the back, shoulders hunched in her worn coat, hands buried in her pockets. She hadn't planned to be here. Her car had carried her down this country road almost on its own, as if searching for a distraction, a reason not to return to the silence of her small house. She told herself she was only here to look, to pass the time, but her eyes betrayed her, searching, restless, hungry for something she couldn't name. The auctioneer's voice rose above the restless murmur of the crowd. His words were brisk, efficient, tinged with impatience. Horses were paraded out one by one, each eyed with cold appraisal. A strong-backed mare fetched a decent price, a spirited gelding even more. The clatter of bids, the nods of men in boots and hats, the quick slap of the auctioneer's gavel. Everything moved in a rhythm of commerce, a value measured in dollars and usefulness. Then came the horse that stopped everything for Clara. She was led out with a rope looped loosely around her neck. No halter, no pride. Her ribs showed through a dull, mud-colored coat, her eyes sunken and dim. Scars traced pale lines along her flank, the ghosts of old cruelty. The horse walked stiffly, her head hanging so low it seemed she might collapse under its weight. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. The auctioneer smirked. Lot 27. Mare 7 years. No papers, no training, no good for breeding. Hardly fit for pasture. Who'll start me at 50? No hands rose. A man in a faded cap muttered, more like 50 to haul her away. Another chuckled, shaking his head. The auctioneer tried again, dropping the price lower, but the crowd was uninterested. The horse, standing in the center of it all, didn't flick an ear, didn't stamp a hoof. She seemed carved from sorrow itself. Clara's chest tightened. She felt the stares of the others, their judgment, their amusement. But in that hollow-eyed mare she saw herself, hollowed, unwanted, dragging the weight of grief that no one else wanted to see. Clara's father had once told her that a person's heart recognized kindred spirits in silence. She hadn't thought about those words in years, but they came to her now, clear as if he were whispering them into her ear. 20, the auctioneer barked. 10, come now, folks. Someone take this off my hands. $10. The room remained still. Clara's hand lifted before she knew it had. Her fingers trembled in the stale air. I'll take her, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The crowd shifted, murmurs rising. A woman nearby whispered, "Fool girl." Someone laughed openly. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow, then slammed the gavel down. Sold. $10 to the lady in the back. Heat rose to Clara's face as eyes turned toward her. She forced her chin up, walked forward, and took the rope. The mare didn't move, didn't even acknowledge her. Just stood there, head low, as if life itself had already been surrendered. Outside, the rain had softened into a mist, clinging to Clara's hair and the mare's ragged coat. She tugged gently at the rope, but the horse planted her hooves, unyielding. A man passing by snorted, "She ain't going nowhere for you, missy. That one's given up." Clara ignored him. She stepped closer, so close that her breath mingled with the mare's. Up close, the horse smelled of damp earth and old wounds. Clara reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the damp hairs along the mare's neck. The skin twitched, but the horse didn't pull away. "You and me," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "Maybe we're both a little broken, but maybe we don't have to stay that way." The mare blinked, a slow, weary movement, and finally lifted her head just enough to look at her. Those eyes, dull, hollow, yet holding the faintest flicker of something, met Clara's, and for a heartbeat, the noise of the world seemed to fade. Clara pulled the rope again, gently, urging her forward. The mare hesitated, then, with a deep, shuddering breath, took a single step. Just one, but it was enough. Enough to make Clara believe she had done the right thing. Enough to plant a fragile seed of hope inside her chest. The murmurs of the crowd faded behind her as she led the mare, slowly, out of the auction yard. The rain lifted, the clouds broke just slightly, and a faint streak of sunlight touched the ground in front of them. Clara glanced back once, at the auction barn that had mocked them both, then forward again. The road ahead was long, uncertain, perhaps impossible. But as the mare walked beside her, head still low but moving now, Clara felt something stir within her, a fragile, flickering light she had thought long extinguished. The world did not cheer for them. No one clapped, no one believed. But Clara tightened her grip on the rope and whispered to the mare once more, as if sealing a promise between them. "We'll find a way. You'll see." And though the horse gave no answer, there was something in the silence that felt like agreement, something that urged Clara to keep walking into the unknown, carrying with her the weight of doubt, the sting of ridicule, and the faint, trembling possibility that she and this forgotten creature might heal one another. The rain-slick road stretched ahead, empty and uncertain, but each step carried them further from the place of laughter and judgment. And as they disappeared into the mist, the question hung unspoken in the damp air. What would become of the saddest horse in the auction, now that someone had finally chosen to believe in her? The drive back to Clara's small farm was slow. The mare resisted each step, hoofs dragging against the wet gravel as though every movement demanded more strength than she had left. Clara spoke to her in low tones, soft words meant to calm, though she wasn't sure whether the horse heard or cared. She had expected resistance, but the lifelessness unsettled her more than any fight would have. At least anger meant there was spirit left. This was something else, a hollow shell moving only because a rope demanded it. When they reached the paddock, Clara opened the gate and loosened the rope, expecting the mare to bolt at the chance of space. Instead, she simply stood, ears drooping, rain clinging to her coat like a second skin. Clara sighed, stepping back to give her freedom, but the horse remained rooted. Inside the small farmhouse, Clara brewed tea with trembling hands. Her mind kept circling the same doubts. $10 hadn't been much, but perhaps even that had been too high a price. She had seen pity in the crowd's eyes, laughter too, and now she wondered if they had been right. She carried her mug to the window and looked out at the still figure in the paddock. The mare hadn't moved. She was a statue in the mist. The following morning brought a weak sunrise, and with it, Clara's first attempt to care for her new companion. She carried a bucket of oats to the fence and set it down. The mare sniffed once, then turned her head away. Clara tried again with fresh hay, with clean water, but the horse refused each offering. Hunger should have driven her, but the refusal seemed deliberate, as though the will to live had already slipped from her grasp. Frustration pricked at Clara. She leaned against the fence, rubbing her forehead. "What happened to you?" she murmured. Her father had taught her patience when she was a girl working with horses by his side, but he had never shown her how to heal one that had already given up. Days passed like this. Clara worked her small farm, mended fences, tended her modest garden, all while keeping one eye on the silent figure in the paddock. At night, she carried a chair outside and sat by the fence, speaking quietly into the dark. She told the mare about her father, about the way the barn felt empty since he'd gone, about the hollow ache of dreams abandoned. The horse never answered, but sometimes, when the lantern light flickered just right, Clara thought she saw an ear twitch in her direction, as if listening despite herself. The neighbors were less patient. One afternoon, as Clara returned from the feed store, she caught two men leaning against the fence, watching the mare. One spat into the dirt. "Thing looks half dead," surprised it's still standing. "Waste of good feed," the other agreed. "Girl ought to cut her losses." Clara bristled, stepping forward. "She's not a thing, and she's not yours to judge." The men exchanged glances, smirks curling their mouths, but they didn't argue. They tipped their hats mockingly and wandered off, leaving Clara with the weight of their scorn pressing on her shoulders. Still, when she looked at the mare, she refused to let those words take root. That night, she carried a bucket of water into the paddock itself. The mare flinched at her approach, stepping back a pace. Clara froze, heart hammering. This was the first real movement she'd seen beyond standing still. Slowly, she lowered the bucket and retreated a step. The mare sniffed cautiously, then drank, her throat working in tense swallows. Clara smiled for the first time in days, relief softening her tired features. It wasn't much, but it was something. By the end of the week, the mare had begun to nibble hay if Clara lingered nearby. She still turned her head from oats, but progress was progress. One evening, Clara rested her arms on the top rail of the fence, watching as the horse bent to graze. She felt a flicker of connection, a fragile thread binding them in shared survival. Naming her came quietly, without planning. Clara whispered it into the dusk, as if testing the sound. Hope. The mare's ears flicked at the word, though she didn't raise her head. Clara repeated it softly. Hope. That's who you are. The next day brought a harder trial. A storm rolled in, dark clouds swallowing the sky, wind whipping through the trees. Rain slashed the fields as thunder cracked overhead. Clara rushed to the paddock to find Hope thrashing, eyes wide, hoofs striking the ground in panic. The fence shook under the force of her fear. Clara's heart pounded, every instinct screaming to stay back, but she pushed through the gate anyway. Easy, she called, her voice barely audible over the storm. It's all right. You're safe. Hope reared, striking dangerously close, but Clara held her ground, inching forward. She remembered nights as a child when thunder frightened her, and her father had sat beside her bed, his calm presence enough to quiet the storm inside her. Now she tried to offer the same. Step by step, she drew closer until the horse's wild eyes locked on hers. Clara reached out, palm open, and stood perfectly still. Rain plastered her hair to her face, soaked her coat through, but she didn't move. For a long, trembling moment, the mare quivered, hooves stamping, muscles bunching to flee. Then, with a shudder that seemed to release years of fear, she lowered her head and pressed it lightly against Clara's chest. The weight of it nearly broke her knees, but Clara held firm, one hand rising to stroke the wet neck. Tears mingled with the rain on her cheeks. That's it, she whispered. I've got you. I won't let you go. Hope's body still trembled, but the wild thrashing had stilled. Together they stood in the storm, fragile trust born in the heart of chaos. For the first time, Clara felt the faint stirrings of something more than pity. This horse wanted to live. She only needed someone willing to remind her how. When the storm passed and silence returned to the drenched fields, Clara led Hope back toward the shelter of the barn. The horse followed without resistance, each step cautious but real. Inside, the lantern's glow cast them in soft gold, and Clara felt a strange certainty settle over her. This was no simple rescue. This was the start of a battle worth fighting. As she closed the stall door behind Hope, Clara leaned her forehead against the wooden frame. Exhaustion pressed heavy on her, but beneath it pulsed something steady, something stronger than she had felt in years. She turned back, once more to look at the mare, who had already lowered her head to the hay, but no longer stood like a statue carved from grief. Clara's voice was low, but firm. We're not done yet. Not by a long shot. The words hung in the warm air of the barn, not as a plea this time, but as a promise. The weeks that followed were marked by slow but undeniable change. Clara rose each morning before the sun, her boots crunching across the frosted grass, her breath rising in pale clouds. Hope was waiting now, ears pricked forward, not the lifeless figure she had been when first brought home. The mare stepped closer to the fence when Clara appeared, a small gesture that filled the woman with quiet triumph. Each day offered new challenges, but beneath the fatigue lay a steady rhythm, a companionship slowly stitching itself together. Clara began with simple groundwork. She stood in the paddock, holding the rope lightly, encouraging Hope to circle her at a walk. At first the mare resisted, stiff and distrustful, but Clara's voice, soft, steady, unwavering, guided her forward. Round after round, hesitation gave way to cooperation. Clara never rushed, never demanded more than Hope could give. She celebrated every small victory, a smooth turn, a moment of eye contact, the simple act of standing without fear. The townsfolk still whispered. At the feed store, Clara overheard a man mutter, "Waste of time, that horse. Girl should sell before it drops dead." Another snorted, She thinks kindness fixes everything. Clara bit back sharp words, reminding herself that their scorn was nothing compared to the mare's gradual transformation. One crisp afternoon, Clara decided it was time to try something new. She led Hope into the round pen, brushed her coat until it gleamed faintly in the weak sunlight, then rested her forehead against the horse's neck. "We'll take it slow," she whispered. "Just you and me." She slipped a blanket onto Hope's back, fastening the straps with gentle hands. The mare flinched, but did not bolt. Clara exhaled, her chest loosening with relief. The blanket was a small step, but one that hinted at possibilities she scarcely dared to imagine. That night, Clara sat on the porch steps, watching fireflies spark in the dark. The memory of her father came unbidden, his voice urging patience, reminding her that broken spirits took longer to mend than broken bones. She let herself smile, a soft, fragile thing. Perhaps he would have been proud of her. Perhaps he would have said she had finally found her way back to what mattered. The bond between woman and horse deepened in subtle ways. Hope followed Clara now, even without a rope, shadowing her steps in the pasture. Sometimes Clara would sit in the grass, resting against a fence post, and the mare would graze close enough that the sound of her chewing seemed like a steady heartbeat. In those moments, Clara felt less alone than she had in years. Yet progress was never without setbacks. One morning, as Clara attempted to lift a saddle pad, Hope startled violently, rearing and nearly striking her. Clara stumbled back, heart racing. She steadied her hands, forcing calm into her voice, but inside she was rattled. What memory had been triggered? What pain still lingered in the horse's mind? She didn't know, but she vowed to uncover it with patience, not force. It was during one of these long days of trial and error that Dalton appeared. He was the wealthiest rancher in the county, broad-shouldered and smug, riding his polished stallion along the fence line as though to flaunt his superiority. He stopped when he saw Clara working with Hope, his grin twisting with mockery. "That the sorry nag you bought?" he drawled. "Could have sworn she'd be in the ground by now." Clara tightened her grip on the rope, but kept her tone even. "She's stronger than you think." Dalton laughed, the sound sharp as a whip. "Stronger? She can barely stand straight. A horse like that won't fetch a penny, much less win respect. You're wasting sweat on pity." Clara felt heat rise in her chest, but she steadied her breath. Sometimes what's broken just needs someone to believe. Dalton shook his head. "Belief won't carry her through a show ring. You'll see. When she fails, don't say I didn't warn you." With a sharp tug on his reins, he wheeled his stallion and trotted away, leaving Clara with the sting of his words echoing in the quiet. The encounter burned in her thoughts for days. She replayed his sneer, his certainty, until it twisted into fuel. She would prove him wrong, not for his sake, but for Hope's. The mare deserved to be seen as more than a burden, more than a mistake. Training intensified. Clara began to jog beside Hope in the pasture, urging her into a trot. The horse's stride was uneven at first, awkward and uncertain, but gradually, strength returned. Muscles filled where bones had once pressed through skin. Her coat grew rich, her eyes brightened. Clara, too, changed, her cheeks flushed with new vitality, her movements carried with fresh determination. They were shaping each other, two wounded souls finding resilience together. One golden afternoon, Clara placed a saddle across Hope's back. This time, the mare trembled but did not shy away. Clara fastened the girth slowly, murmuring soft encouragements. Then, heart pounding, she placed her foot in the stirrup and swung gently onto the horse's back. For a moment, Hope stiffened, her muscles quivering. Clara sat motionless, her weight steady, her hand stroking the horse's neck. "It's all right," she whispered. "I trust you." Hope took a step, then another, and suddenly they were moving together, slow but sure, across the pasture. Clara's throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. She hadn't felt this kind of freedom in years, not since her father had passed, not since she had given up on dreams she once cherished. Now, atop this once-forgotten horse, she felt alive again. The ride was brief, but when Clara dismounted, she wrapped her arms around Hope's neck, pressing her cheek to the warm hide. "We did it," she breathed. We really did it." Word spread quickly. Neighbors who had scoffed began to take notice. Whispers shifted from ridicule to astonishment. The horse that had been mocked at auction was changing before their eyes, transformed by patience and faith. Yet Dalton was not done. One evening, Clara found him waiting near her gate, a smug smile tugging his lips. "If you think that horse is ready, prove it," he challenged. "Bring her to the county fair. Let's see if she can stand before a crowd without crumbling." Clara hesitated. The thought of thrusting hope into such chaos filled her with dread. But Dalton's words cut deep, and behind them was something sharper, the chance to show the world what belief could build. "I'll bring her," Clara said finally, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. Dalton smirked, tipping his hat. "Then we'll see what she's really worth." He rode off into the darkening fields, leaving Clara staring after him, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and determination. As she turned back to Hope, the mare stood waiting, her eyes clear, her body strong in the fading light. Clara stepped forward, resting her hand against the horse's neck. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we face it together." The fair loomed ahead, a test of all they had built, a crucible of doubt and courage. For the first time, Clara felt ready to walk into that storm, not because she had conquered her fear, but because she no longer faced it alone. The morning sun spilled gold across the valley, casting long shadows that stretched toward the ranch. Daniel woke earlier than usual, stirred by a gnawing mix of dread and determination. Today wasn't just another day of tending to chores. It was the day when his promise to the horse would either be fulfilled or broken. He knew too well that he had delayed long enough, skirting the truth, telling half-promises even to himself. The stallion, who had been through as much as Daniel, deserved an honest choice, freedom or captivity. As he stepped outside, the crisp air filled his lungs, sharp enough to remind him that time was running short. The stallion waited at the far end of the paddock, head lifted high, ears twitching as though he had anticipated Daniel's arrival. Their eyes met across the distance, and Daniel felt the familiar pull, an unspoken thread binding them. He wondered if it was loyalty or merely habit that kept the horse near. Elena approached from the barn, her face shaded by the brim of her hat. She had become an unshakable presence these last weeks, guiding Daniel with patience and quiet resolve. "He's ready," she said softly, as though reading the thought that had held Daniel captive all night. "But the question is, are you?" Daniel forced a crooked smile, though it faltered almost immediately. "That's the part one can't figure out. If I let him go, what if he never looks back? And if I keep him, what if I'm chaining him to something he doesn't want anymore?" His voice cracked beneath the weight of those words. Elena stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm briefly before falling away. "You've been fighting battles that ended long ago. This isn't about losing him, Daniel. It's about setting both of you free." The truth in her words stung, but he couldn't deny it. His heart still carried the trenches, the smoke, the hollow echoes of men who never came home. He had held on to the stallion as though the animal's survival was proof that some part of him hadn't been shattered. But maybe, just maybe, the horse had carried him long enough, and now it was time to return the favor. By midday, Daniel prepared the old wooden gate that led to the open land beyond the valley. The stallion paced restlessly inside the paddock, nostrils flaring at the scent of wild grass carried on the breeze. Every movement of the animal radiated power and longing, a reminder that no matter how many nights he had spent sheltered in a stable, his spirit remained untamed. Daniel led him out slowly, the rope taut, but not strained, until they stood before the open path. He rested a hand against the stallion's neck, feeling the tremor of muscles coiled beneath the skin. "You carried me through things I didn't think I could survive," Daniel whispered, his voice roughened by the swell of emotion in his chest. "Maybe now it's my turn to carry you into whatever comes next." Elena stood a few paces behind, silent but steady, her presence like a lantern in the dim uncertainty. She did not interfere, only watched, as though she knew this moment belonged solely to the two of them. Daniel unknotted the rope with trembling hands. For a moment, the stallion remained still, his ears flicking back and forth, uncertain. Then he stepped forward, unbound. The sound of his hooves, striking earth, echoed like a drumbeat in Daniel's ribcage. The horse trotted a short distance, then broke into a gallop, mane flying like a banner of freedom in the sunlight. Daniel's throat tightened as he watched the powerful silhouette move farther, the space between them widening with each stride. And then, unexpectedly, the stallion slowed. He turned his head back, nostrils flaring, eyes fixed on Daniel. The pause was brief, but it seared itself into Daniel's memory. The horse wasn't just leaving. He was acknowledging what had been shared, what could never be undone. Daniel felt his knees weaken as relief and sorrow tangled inside him. He had given the stallion what he needed most, choice. But the story wasn't finished. For as the stallion disappeared over the ridge, a strange hollowness swept into Daniel's chest. The ranch, once full of meaning, suddenly felt like an echo chamber. He turned to Elena, and she read the conflict etched on his face. "You did the right thing," she reassured, though her voice carried its own undercurrent of uncertainty. "I know," he said, but his words rang thin. "I just don't know what's left for me now." Her gaze softened, yet held firm. "What's left is to decide whether you'll keep living in the shadow of what you lost, or if you'll finally step into something new." Daniel swallowed hard. For years he had believed his future was as barren as the trenches he once walked. But Elena's words planted something he hadn't dared to feel in years, a fragile, trembling seed of possibility. Perhaps he wasn't as finished as he thought. As evening fell, Daniel lingered at the gate, staring into the distance where the stallion had vanished. He imagined the horse running free across open plains, carving a new destiny. The thought tore at him, but it also filled him with an odd peace. In letting go, he had rediscovered a fragment of himself he thought long buried. Behind him, Elena's voice broke the silence. "He'll find his way. And so will you." Daniel turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers in the dimming light. For the first time in years, he allowed the possibility that she might be right. The war had taken much, but maybe it hadn't taken everything. The stallion's freedom was not an ending, it was an opening. As the first stars pierced the twilight sky, Daniel drew a deep breath and stepped away from the gate. Tomorrow would come, with its own choices, its own battles. And this time, perhaps, he was ready to face them. The days that followed were restless ones, charged with a tension that neither Elias nor those around him could ignore. The ranch seemed to breathe uneasily, as though it sensed that some greater trial was looming. Word of Grady's challenge had spread quickly through the town, passed from mouth to mouth, each telling adding more weight to the story until it became almost mythic. Some scoffed that an old man and a battered horse could do anything worth witnessing. Others whispered that they would not miss such a confrontation for the world. For Elias, every dawn was a chance to test both his own endurance and the will of the stallion that fate had pressed into his care. Orion was no longer the shadow of a creature he had once been. Those scars still traced his body. Though the faint stiffness lingered in his step, there was fire in his eyes again, a restless flame that could no longer be mistaken for defeat. Elias felt it each time he brushed the stallion's mane, each time Orion lowered his head to accept the halter without resistance. It was as if the horse had been waiting all his life for someone to believe in him again. Sarah, for her part, seemed caught between hope and fear. She lingered near the corral in the evenings, watching as Elias coaxed Orion into exercises that demanded balance, focus, and trust. Sometimes she would call encouragement. Other times she would stand silent, her hands gripping the rail so tightly her knuckles turned white. Elias noticed, though he never spoke of it. He knew that in Sarah's heart, every stride Orion took toward recovery was also a step that carried her closer to risking disappointment. The day of the challenge drew nearer, marked in Elias's mind as a storm he could neither outrun nor ignore. Grady's ranch hands had been by more than once, taunting him, mocking Orion's scars, reminding him of the humiliation that awaited. Elias said little in return. He had lived long enough to know that words could not shift the course of truth, only action could. One night, as the moon cast a silver glow across the ranch, Elias found himself sitting beside Orion in the quiet of the stable. The horse shifted, the sound of his breath steady, warm against the straw. Elias leaned against the wooden beam, his body weary, but his spirit stubbornly awake. "You're more than they think you are," he murmured, his voice rough, not meant for any ear but Orion's. "And so am I. Maybe we've both been forgotten, cast aside. But I'll be damned if I let him make fools of us. Tomorrow we show him." Orion flicked his ears at the sound, then lowered his great head until his muzzle brushed against Elias's shoulder. The gesture was simple, wordless, but it sent something like iron through the old man's veins. He had ridden many horses in his life, but none had spoken to him in silence the way Orion did now. When morning came, the sky broke in streaks of red and gold, as if the day itself had been lit by fire. The town gathered in numbers Elias had not expected. Wagons lined the dirt road. Men and women clustered in groups. Children perched on fences to see better. The air buzzed with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, the kind that always surrounded a spectacle. Grady was already there, smug in his posture, astride a glossy stallion that gleamed with health and raw strength. His laughter carried across the corral as he spotted Elias leading Orion into view. "Look at that," Grady called, loud enough for all to hear. "The ghost horse and his keeper. I almost feel guilty. This will be over too quickly." The crowd chuckled, though some exchanged wary glances, unsure if they were about to witness mockery or miracle. Elias ignored the sting of the words. He focused on Orion, whose ears twitched but whose stride was steady. Together they entered the corral, the dust stirring beneath their steps. The moment stretched, silent now, as even laughter gave way to anticipation. The test was simple, or so Grady had designed it. A series of obstacles stood in the arena, barrels to weave through, rails to clear, narrow paths to tread without faltering. It was not the kind of trial meant only for speed or strength, but for harmony between horse and rider. Grady, in his arrogance, had assumed that such harmony was impossible for an animal so broken and a man so old. He went first, guiding his stallion with showy confidence, tearing through the barrels, clearing the rails with a power that drew applause. When he finished, he raised his hand in mock salute, bowing toward Elias with a sneer. "Try not to trip over your own feet, old man," he taunted. Elias mounted Orion slowly, without theatrics, without rush. He felt the steady rise and fall of the horse beneath him, the quiet strength waiting to be called upon. He did not speak, not to the crowd, not to Grady. His words were for Orion alone. "Just you and me, boy. One step at a time." And then they moved. The first obstacle, the barrels, loomed ahead. Orion's muscles tightened, his stride uncertain, but Elias's hands were steady, his voice calm. Together they wove, not with Grady's flashy speed, but with a grace that drew an unexpected hush from the crowd. Each turn was deliberate, each movement precise, as though horse and rider shared a single thought. Next came the rails. Orion's ears pricked forward, his breath quickening. Elias felt the hesitation, the memory of pain. He leaned low, whispering encouragement, and in a burst of power Orion lifted, clearing the first, then the second. The crowd gasped, then erupted in cheers. Grady's smirk faltered. The final challenge lay before them, a narrow path bordered by poles, requiring perfect control. Orion slowed, his body coiled with nerves, but Elias guided him gently, one rein, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. They moved as though balanced on a thread, and when they emerged unbroken at the other end, the cheer that rose was thunderous. Elias dismounted, patting Orion's neck with trembling hands. He did not need the applause. The victory was already his. Yet the sound of it filled the air, drowning out Grady's sputtering protests. In that moment, Elias knew that he and Orion had proven something greater than strength or youth. They had shown the power of trust, of perseverance, of refusing to bow to the weight of doubt. But as the cheers still echoed, a shadow crossed Elias's thoughts. For every victory, he knew, there came a cost. And deep inside, he wondered what price he and Orion would be asked to pay next.